You know, sometimes countries just get a decade filled with bad luck. After the revolutions of 1848, many Italian states rescinded their constitutions and other concessions they made. But unlike the others, Sardinia kept their constitution, the Statuto Albertino, in place. Even though the new king Vittorio-Emmanuele II disliked sharing his power. However, the king still had considerable influence with this constitution. For example, he appointed ministers and remained commander-in-chief. But he had to share some powers with parliament. We have seen in the revolutions of 1848 that the Risorgimento needed more than well-intentioned idealistic philosophers, heroic freedom fighters, or ambitious leadership. They needed a Bismarck. And the Italians would now get theirs. Camillo Benso, the Count of Cavour. He was a rather rotund politician with a habit of stress eating and sleeping with married women. I am not kidding. He was smart and calculating, and Cavour always had a plan. When it came to economic policies, at least. When it came to other aspects of statecraft, he just had a knack for improv. Until 1848, his career wasn't going well. But after Sardinia got his parliament, he became Minister of Agriculture and Trade from 1850 to 52, and Finances from 51 to 52 in the Zaglio's cabinet. In his youth, he had traveled throughout Europe. There he had gained some modern ideas on running an economy. He was a proponent of free trade and railway construction. His reforms made the economy of Sardinia-Piedmont the most dynamic and strongest among the Italian states. And his railway enthusiasm changed the virtually railless Piedmont into the home of 40% of all Italian tracks by 1861. In 1852, it was his time to shine. He became the Prime Minister of Sardinia and formed a coalition cabinet of left-wing and right-wing moderates, which he called the connubio, or the marriage. When he was trying to take away power from the various religious orders, like the Jesuits, some conservatives wanted the king to get rid of him. The king was going to do it, but couldn't find a suitable replacement, so in the end Cavour got to stay. This split the conservative wing along monarchist and religious lines. This made the king dependent on Cavour, which gave Cavour more influence than ever. Cavour wasn't the biggest supporter of Italian unification, and was mostly preoccupied with domestic policies. But he got involved in the Unification project by invading Crimea. It'll make sense, I swear. In the 1850s, the Brits and French got involved in a tussle between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, and duked it out on the Crimean Peninsula. Now I'm gonna gloss over the war, because the war itself isn't really relevant right now. Initially, Cavour wanted nothing to do with it, but he felt both domestic and international pressure to join in. So, in 1855, 2 years into the war, Sardinia joined the side of Britain, France and the Ottomans, and sent an expeditionary force to the Black Sea. They stood out in their involvement in the Battle of the Chernaya and the Siege of Sevastopol. Cavour got to go to Paris for peace talks. There, Vittorio-Emmanuele and Cavour wanted to curry French and British favor and get them to help with an attack on Austria. Though Cavour didn't get what they wanted, the fact that he got to sit at the table with the big guns gave Sardinia immense prestige among the Italians. Another consequence of the war, Austria refused to aid the Russian side. This made the Austrians virtually diplomatically isolated. And this paved the way right open for Cavour was fixing for a fight. But like Charles Albert, he primarily wanted to snatch Lombardy Venetia in order to strengthen the Sardinian state. But unlike the Italians in the previous war, the Sardinians now had a secret weapon, a great power. See, in France, a second Napoleon had risen, Napoleon III. That one doesn't count. He was the French president that sent troops to help the Pope regain Rome in 1849. In his youth, he had actually been a member of the Carbonari, to fight against Austrian influence in Italy. But when France became a republic again, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte became its first president. It took him about 3 years before he crowned himself emperor. He liked to compare himself to his more famous uncle, but was really not cut from the same cloth. This man, Felice Orsini, had a great scheme in mind to unite Italy. Let's check my notes. He wanted to unite Italy by assassinating the Emperor of France? I mean, to give him credit, it kinda worked. When he wrote to Napoleon III saying no peace would come to Europe until Italy was united, and then tried to kill him, Napoleon became very interested in Italy. So, good going Orsini, I guess. So Napoleon and Cavour made a secret agreement in 1858. France would help Sardinia to conquer Lombardy Venetia. They would then form an Italian federation of sorts with the Pope, the two Sicilies, and a new central Italian kingdom. The catch was that Cavour had to find a good excuse for war, and France would be given Savoy and Nice, and would become the new protector of Monaco. Sardinia went hard at work at mobilizing their forces. But then Russia and Great Britain pressured Napoleon to call it off. But then Franz Joseph's Austria deployed their signature move and sent a badly timed ultimatum in April 1859 to the Sardinians to call off the mobilization. Sardinia refused, and Austria declared war on 3rd of May. The French, led by Napoleon III, sent 170,000 troops into Piedmont. The Sardinians had 70,000 troops led by their king Vittorio-Emmanuele II. And the 220,000 Austrian soldiers were led by Field Marshal Count Ferenc July. The Austrians had hoped to crush the Sardinians before the French could come to their aid. The Austrians crossed into Sardinian territory and captured Novara and then threatened Turin. But July could not fill the shoes of Radetzky, who had died a year earlier. July was too cautious and gave the French and Sardinians plenty of time to link up and organize defenses. Thus the Austrians retreated. The Allies then beat the Austrians at Montebello, even though the Austrians outnumbered them. This made July only more cautious. Under the command of Patrice de MacMahon, the French and Sardinians won a decisive battle at Magenta, and now the two monarchs could enter Milan victoriously. The Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph was unhappy with July, and decided to take command himself. Franz Joseph knew Napoleon III was wavering and decided to play defensively. Then the two sides clashed at the Battle of Solferino on the 24th of June 1859, which the Austrians lost. After this battle, Napoleon was kind of done with the war. See, he wanted out for various reasons. He was afraid Prussia was going to meddle in the war, he was wondering if creating a stronger country on his border was actually a good move, and the amount of losses kinda curbed his enthusiasm. So behind the back of his Sardinian allies, Napoleon III decided to open peace talks with the Austrians. In the resulting Villafranca armistice, the Austrians would get to keep Venice, but were to hand over Lombardy to the Sardinians, except for Mantua. This move enraged the Italians. Not only did the French want to leave the war prematurely, they also did so behind their backs. But perhaps the most angry was Cavour. After such a spectacular win, he was starting to warm up to Italian unification. But with Napoleon attempting to sue for peace, he resigned in protest. The Treaty of Zurich was signed in November 1859 by the three belligerents. The agreements of the Villafranca armistice were reaffirmed, and the signatories agreed to the Italian Federation plan, but that never really panned out. In central Italy, many of the rulers had fled, and the states joined together and wanted Sardinia to incorporate them. But the French didn't agree. Then Cavour came back to power, because the king still couldn't find a satisfying alternative. With the Treaty of Turin in 1860, the Sardinians handed over Savoy, Nice and Monaco to the French as promised, both as payment for their aid and as a bribe to get them behind the central Italian annexation. But the giving away of Italian territory wasn't received very well by the Italians. Cavour, however, only had to point out what they had gained in exchange for this loss, which satisfied most critics. Cavour had successfully hijacked and took control of the Republican and nationalist goals for unification and made it the moderates' game. But there was one Nizar who didn't let himself be controlled that easily. Meanwhile, Garibaldi had settled down in Sardinia. With an inheritance, he bought half the island of Caprera and settled down as a farmer. And farming? Really? A man of your talents? Then the Second Italian War of Independence broke out, and he volunteered to help the Sardinians. Even though Garibaldi was a Republican, he thought the unification of Italy was more important than his own ideology. But when Cavour traded his hometown to the French, he didn't think that was very nice. Initially, he wanted to disrupt the handover, but some friends talked him out of this plan. So then Garibaldi's eyes wandered southward. Southern Italy was falling behind after 1848. While Sardinia was experiencing economic growth and a liberalizing society, in the south the economy was stagnant and the Bourbon kings were transforming the two Sicilies into a police state so they could hold on to power. This hurt their international standing, especially with more progressive countries like France and Great Britain. The latter had previously been investing in their economy. Their situation got even worse when their two greatest allies, Austria and Russia, were weakened by the war in Lombardy and Crimea respectively. Then in 1860, unrest on Sicily gave the opening for many exiled nationalists to return, among which was Francesco Crispi, a nationalist and Republican. He convinced Garibaldi to come over and liberate the island. Garibaldi left the Sardinian kingdom with an army of 1,088 soldiers armed with old guns and clad in red shirts. This frightened Cavour. He was only in favor of any form of resurgimenting actions as long as he was in control of them. Afraid of Garibaldi and Crispy's Republican tendencies, he tried to put a stop to it. But the king? He loved it. And Garibaldi was also popular with the people, so Cavour could not stop him. And thus began Expedition of the 1000. I can imagine Garibaldi receiving Crispy's call and being like, "Certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for?" I mean, he really stood no chance. He landed in Sicily with his 1,000 volunteers and faced 2,000 Bourbon soldiers at Calatafimi. And won. For the local Sicilians, this was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. They then moved to Palermo, reinforced by 3,000 local volunteers, and besieged a city that had a garrison of 20,000. His plan was to rally the Palerman populace, and significant numbers did. Seeing the city turn against him, the Bourbon general requested an armistice. Yet another stunning victory for Garibaldi. Together with Crispy, he was going to rule the island. Garibaldi proclaimed himself as a Roman-style dictator in the name of the Sardinian king. Unlike his war, his regime was pretty bad. It solved very little of the actual issues the island faced. He did manage to levy an army of about 20,000 troops to retake the rest of the island from the remaining Bourbon troops, though most of them had already been recalled to the mainland to quell unrest. He took the remaining Bourbon holdouts, and was then going to cross the Straits of Messina to invade Calabria. Crispy and Garibaldi's plan was to take Naples and then move on to Rome. But Cavour said, "No, you stay on that island or so help me God." Garibaldi went anyway. In Calabria, the Bourbon troops offered little resistance, and the king fled Naples for the fortified city of Gaeta. Then the armies faced each other at the Volturno River. At the Battle of the Volturno, Garibaldi squeezed out a narrow win, and it was all over for the Bourbons. Cavour in the meantime decided he needed to take back control of the situation. See, there was another reason why Cavour couldn't allow Garibaldi to attack Rome: the Pope. Pius IX was still under French protection. So Cavour fabricated the crisis with the Papal States and sent in the army led by the Sardinian king. They took another chunk of papal territory and went southwards to besiege Gaeta. Having Vittorio-Emmanuele lead the armies was a smart move because... oh wait, maybe I should talk about the king a bit as well. Vittorio-Emmanuele II succeeded his father Charles Albert after his failed war. He was a bit of a boorish man and had two big passions: warring and a word that sounds similar. A real Bobby B. He wasn't very frugal and spent a big chunk of the budget on the army, the building of hunting lodges, and other pleasantries. Wait a minute. Well, anyway, turns out having Vittorio-Emmanuele lead the armies was a smart move, because this guy is loyal. After the surrender of the two Sicilies, the two armies met at Teano on the 26th of October 1860. Garibaldi greeted the king with a handshake as King of Italy. The south was annexed by Sardinia, and on the 17th of March 1861, King Vittorio-Emmanuele II of Sardinia became King Vittorio-Emmanuele II of Italy. The unification mostly succeeded on Sardinia's terms. The new Italian government wasn't even really a new Italian one. Cavour kinda just slapped the Sardinian way of government on the entire peninsula, dashing any hopes of local autonomy in a process called Piedmontization. For the first 4 years, the city of Turin in Piedmont remained the capital, until it was moved to Florence in 1865. But there were more troubles and points of friction. Vittorio-Emmanuele didn't even change his regnal number. Widespread mismanagement led to a lot of banditry in the south. The country was rife with regional differences, both economic and cultural. And worst of all, the map wasn't complete yet. Unfortunately, Cavour didn't get to see the completion of the unification. Overworked and suffering from insomnia, he fell ill and passed away on the 6th of June 1861, at just 51 years of age. But in Prussia, Europe found Cavour's equal, Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck had embarked Prussia on their own unification project, and in 1866 he too was going to kick it off by attacking Austria. The Italians agreed to help the Prussians by invading Venetia, but they bungled it. At least the main body did. The guerrilla troops of Garibaldi did pretty well, as is tradition. Prussia, however, did great, kicking off a pattern between Germany and her allies. After the war, Austria gave Italy the Iron Crown, which, by the way, is just a baller name for a crown. This crown was part of the Holy Roman Imperial claim to Italy from the Middle Ages. Maybe more importantly, alongside this crown, the Italians gained Venice. Now, only one question remained unanswered: the Roman question. Well, no worries. Bismarck came to the rescue for that one as well. Indirectly though. The last obstacle in his path to unification was France. So he goaded Napoleon III into attacking him in 1870, which went pretty poorly for the French. Now they had to recall their troops from Rome, leaving the Pope all on his own. Victor-Emmanuel offered the Pope an opportunity for both to save face. The Pope should accept Italian protection and give them Rome, except for the Leonine city, and Lazio in return. Pius said no. So then the Italian army led by Raffaele Cadorna moved into the Papal States in 1870. The Papal army stood no chance. This concluded the territorial part of the Italian Unification. But the Roman question was not fully answered. See, the Pope still held on to this part of Rome and refused to acknowledge the Italian state. This hurt Italy's reputation with Catholics, their primary religion. The Italians extended all kinds of olive branches, but the Pope wouldn't budge. Italy then passed a law in 1871 that gave the Pope many new rights and guarantees, which didn't satisfy the Pope himself, but did satisfy the rest of the Catholic world. The issue would continue until 1929, when Mussolini and Pius XI signed the Lateran Treaty, which is why Vatican City is also here. Now that Italy was united, Rome became the capital. But Victor-Emmanuel took his sweet time before moving to Rome. His refusal to change his regnal number was also not very popular, as this reinforced the feeling that this wasn't a unification, but a conquest by Sardinia. He was actually not very happy with the conclusion of unification. He had no clue on what to do with the rest of his life. In his latter reign, he even took more of a backseat in government. Like many modern constitutional monarchs, he realized he could no longer defy the will of an elected parliament. Hey, wait a minute. Well, in any case, there were still plenty of issues for this new Italy. There was a bitter divide between North and South, literacy rates were still low, industrialization wasn't very widespread, only a fraction of people were eligible to vote, and the South still had their banditry problem. But this video is about Italian unification, so in that regard, job's done! Hey there, I hope you guys enjoyed me dipping my toes into a different topic. I'm planning on bringing a bit more variety into the topics I cover, maybe alternating a bit between a series and some one-off topics. But don't worry, I'm not abandoning the Friesland project. Expect the next video to continue that series. Anyway, if y'all want to bring Vicky E more wine, then please consider leaving a like, comment, and click that subscribe button. Also, if you want to see the next Friesland video, then don't forget to click the bell icon to get notified when that video is uploaded. Have a good one and see y'all next time.